All right, in this video, we're going to talk about side control and some tactics and strategies for holding the position. In the previous video, when we talked about the mount, we talked about how the big advantage of the mount is that you can devote some of your resources to holding the position and some of your resources to attacking submissions, while the person on bottom has to devote all their resources to defending one or the other for the most part. That's unfortunately not true of side control. Because my hips are not over top of Rory's hips, because my legs are not actually able to put his hips in a box, I pretty much have to compromise between, let's say, holding Rory here, which does not give me any options to submit him, or giving him a little bit more room. So for instance, allowing him to underhook me maybe, and then going for a submission that way. And that's why side control can be so much trickier for people, is because they don't understand that distinction. And also, I mean, for all the other reasons that beginners tend to make mistakes, they'll overcommit their center of gravity, they won't understand the alignment difference. Like, we'll get into that a little bit. But just keep in mind, that's probably the biggest distinction between these two most common dominant top positions is mount, you can hold it and go at it with submission attempts, especially in the gi. Whereas side control, you kind of have to choose between the two. And something we spend a lot of time on in our academy is getting beginners to recognize that, and getting beginners to understand how we can maximize our control while still offering our opponent like a glimpse of an escape, so that they try to do something which then allows us to try to submit them. We want our opponent to be able to move a little bit. If I get a side control that's based around breaking Rory's posture entirely, breaking his structure, making sure that I'm chest to chest, getting good wedges in place so he really doesn't have a good chance at escaping, he's probably not going to try very hard to escape. And it's his effort to either turn into me, so just, and we've talked about the escapes, but basically somebody's escaping, they're either regarding, they're turning in on an underhook and basically wrestling up, or they're turning away and trying to get to turtle and temporarily, hopefully, exposing their back. So if he doesn't think he can do one of those three things, he's just going to sit there, and it becomes very, very difficult to submit him. Again, the gi does offer some options, like I may be able to undo the lapel and attack in all these different ways, but for the most part, if I'm committing with my arms to holding him, I'm not able to attack him. So just understanding that at the outset. Another thing to understand, and we've kind of beat this point to death, but we're going to beat it to death is that if I get past somebody's guard, there is a lot of difference between side control, where I'm in front of his legs, but Rory's got his alignment, he's got his frames, and I don't have any meaningful control right now. Like, I'm trying to attach to Rory, but go ahead and oh yeah, he's able to re-guard very easily there. So there's a difference between that side control and this side control,
sweet Jesus,
where I've got his face crushed, he's got no frames in the way, I've got wedges in place, I'm chest to chest, he's carrying a bunch of my weight. And there are different versions of that. I'm not trying to say that's the only version of it, but just any variation on side control where these are not in my way, and there's a minimal chance that this knee is going to come in or that this underhook is going to come in. If I'm not worried about those things, and he's not worried about escaping, then it's a much better position than if he's just got some frames in the way. So let's discuss the control positions based around the idea that when you get past someone's legs, you're probably going to be at the hips without easy access to controlling the torso. So if I've just gotten by the guard and Rory's got his arms in the way and I start trying to connect to the upper body, he'll re-guard instantly. That's a very, very common error, as people go after the upper body control. And frankly, the reason they make that error is because their partners don't do a good job of blocking, and then they run into somebody who does do a good job of blocking, and so it's not necessarily your fault. But just know that if the arms are in the way at all, let's just go back here for a second, what I'm going to look to do is move my knee underneath his hips and create a wedge. So let's just, if we want to use a title, we can say low side control and high side control. With low side control, I've now eliminated his ability to re-guard, because I've put his hips in a box.
my leg is wedged. So nice to be here.
Yeah, so I'm using my right thigh, sliding in as a wedge underneath his butt, shelving his leg, and my rib cage is covering his thighs, and I'm making knee elbow connection the same way we emphasized it in the guard. It's very important in top position. I'm creating knee elbow connection. I'm actually dead toes here with my right foot because I'm not looking to generate force here. I'm looking to lower my center of gravity and create as much immobilization as possible. If Rory tries to hip escape away from me, even if he can, I can just follow him very easily. Because he doesn't have his, the frames, like his upper body frames, he doesn't have his arm able to keep my hip in place. The way that the hip escape works, in this case, is my hips are kind of locked in place by Rory's elbow, and when he hip escapes, it's hard for me to follow him because of this frame. By going to this low version, he can't reach my hips with his elbow. He can put his hand on my hip, but that does not really help him. And we'll talk about dealing with this kind of stuff a little bit later on. But this is where I want to get to. And then this allows me to either, if he is trying to reach out and grab me, now there's a lot of space for me to pummel inside. There's space for me to like use my head, use my shoulders to gain underhooks, to gain some kind of upper body control. Because I'm so far away that the only way his arms can reach me is if they're extended. Extended frames can be good, but they can also be used as powerful levers against somebody. So I want him to think this is a good idea, and then even something as simple as blading my torso will allow me to climb up to that high kind of side control. So that's just the first thing. Understand that. Don't rush to get to the head and the neck. Establish some control of the hips using a wedge.
This is still Rob just trying to create a box around my hips.
Yeah, it's the same thing as mount.
Yeah, if he doesn't have something on either side of my body here, then he's not going to be able to pin me.
And you'll notice that I'm going to be, in this case, live toes with my left foot and dead toes with my right. So my right foot is tucked in. I'm putting weight heavy over his hips. And then this foot, I can use to push off if I need to. Right? Alternately, we could use the same idea to shelf this leg and manipulate the hips this way, which we'll talk about in a second. Once I've done this, if I'm able to fight through, again, based on the idea that his arms will be a little bit more vulnerable, even if, we talk about if somebody's framing the hips now, someone's framing my hips now, this is one of the reasons I want live toes, is so that I can kill this arm and cross face him. If I was starting to pass the guard and I got some control of the hips and this hand is in my way, as long as I keep my hip fairly tight, I can always just bring my knee over top, cross face him, and then I can start to gain this upper body control. If this elbow is in my way now, I can just use my shoulder or any kind of, my biceps. I can even take a Y block here, and I'm not trying to push his arm, I'm just keeping it in place and then moving myself around it. So be wary of trying to push against isometrically strong arm positions. But if I'm trying to push his arm this way and he's resisting it in that direction, but then I change to a downward direction or I change to an upward direction. Just don't try to go directly against the isometric strength that somebody's resisting with and don't try to go directly against the angle of the frame. Change the angles and you'll be able to manipulate people's arms relatively easily with whichever surface you choose, whether it's a Y block, bicep, shoulder, anything like that. So we've established control of the hips. We've used some lever access and we've gotten ourselves to here. And now we've got sort of high version of side control where we can start manipulating our partner's posture and start making it necessary for them to respond. People can eat a crossface sometimes so they don't have to respond, but the more I get to here, the more I now bring my knee up, the more I start to do this, now I can actually start to create submission attempts because I've established enough alignment break where there's an asymmetry between my alignment and my opponent's alignment. I've established enough control over his hips with my legs and my hips that I can now start to free a limb. And you'll notice that the closer this resembles mount, the more I can start to attack submissions at the same time as controlling the position. So that's when I'm able to move all the way to upper body control. If, however, I never quite establish this upper body control, and my partner starts to bring his knee in. This is one of the most important things about controlling side control is you're gonna have to have an answer for this because this is by far the most likely thing you're gonna deal with. You'll deal with the underhook as well, and we'll talk about that too, but this motion here, you guys probably remember the leg drag since I know you've watched this entire series, haven't missed an episode,
But basically, anytime somebody starts to re-guard while I'm attempting to establish my control, I'm going to look to plant this leg in the middle. My right leg is going to push towards Rory's left leg using my shin to redirect his hips. And I'm going to move back into side control. So anytime somebody's getting to here, this has to happen. I'm not trying to push his leg out of the way like this. This is not productive. I'm just driving my shin against his other leg to turn his hips in the other direction. While I'm doing this, I do need to connect to his upper body, because if I just do this and he can chest escape, he can move his, not hip escape, yeah, exactly, he can do that. Now I'm not able to follow up as well. I'm not able to, like, I can't create the angle nearly as well now that his spine is parallel with mine. But while we're still here, in the gi, this is really easy. You just get a grip on their collar. They can't get away from you. In no gi, this is a little bit more difficult, but one thing that's really helpful is just to hook like this, trying to like hook the triceps with the palm of your hand and your fingers, but also try to use your forearm and your biceps to create some wedging pressure. So pull away from me now. Should be a lot more difficult, but I should still be able to do that. We can also always grab the head from either side and just keep your partner. You can grab the triceps. Literally any attachment point to the upper body is, as long as it's like structurally functional, is going to be fine. And we can move our partner to here and do that.
This was another game changer, because this was a similar idea of what I talked about in Full Mount, where we're looking at a bit of a tactical retreat.
Yeah.
Rock can be quite high up at the chest, but doesn't really mean shit if I start to already get my knee in a
Yeah,
side.
if I'm way up here and then this knee starts to come in, I'm like, oh man, this is, oh, damn it. And now this is how quickly things can change. I'm about to be submitted because I was greedy and I didn't.
But now, instead of staying up in my chest, once we're on field, he drops back down, and while he's able to stay quite high here, he might even have had to go a little bit lower down to the hips. This is technically, we're going from side control, high side control, to a leg drag position. I mean, you're backing up essentially.
Yeah.
You're kind of back into a guard pass. But I don't have any guard established. My alignment is compromised here. This is, like, I was so close to getting my guard back, and now I'm just like, oh, what the hell just happened?
And because I'll usually have some form of upper body control at that point, when I go back to the leg drag, it's different than being back to a leg drag where he's got defense possible. It's back to a leg drag where I'm still somewhat connected to his torso.
The finishing position.
So yeah, like I would much rather take one step back and go into a really solid finishing a guard pass position than take 2 or 3 or 4 steps back and end up back in someone's guard because I ignore this knee. So this is probably the most common problem and most common solution, or I should say most common, best solution, I don't think it's common, for understanding side control at the hips, understanding it at the upper body, and then dealing with what is the main problem you're going to face relatively easily. The other big issue you're going to face, not as much at the beginner level, but certainly at the intermediate level, and if you're dealing with anybody who has a wrestling background, is people will underhook you and try to come up on wrestling. There are 2 fairly simple solutions to that. Well, one's fairly simple, the other one's also simple, but just takes quite a while to develop. Whenever somebody starts to get an underhook, if you pop up to knee ride, you should be able to knock them back down and use that windshield wiper motion that Rory covered in the mount video to switch sides. Because popping up onto the knee right here, this is great, but if I just stay here, Rory can knee me in the butt, make my leg light, and still come up on wrestling. So it's not like I can just pop my knee up. Let's have your head facing the camera, please, Rory. Yeah. So if I feel that somebody's starting to underhook me and I pop up, I use my hands to make my legs light. As soon as I pop up, I'm driving my shin across his body, bringing my knee to this side, and then windshield wipering, and now I flattened him out. Now I can try to cross face him, I can go to the mount, I can go back to side control. That's a really simple one. And then the other one, and you'll see this, if you've ever seen any high-level jiu-jitsu, you've 100% seen this movement. We call it a spin behind, some people call it a top spin. But basically, when somebody starts to gain an underhook, we're talking about that movement. Rory turns in, he underhooks me. I'm talking about that. I'm not gonna teach it because that by itself is like of all the moves, like usually in class we teach several movements. That movement requires one class, basically 45 minutes, to teach it to beginners. To teach it to somebody who's never seen it before, usually takes about 45 minutes. And at that point, about half the class still isn't doing it quite right. This is maybe the most important, or certainly for side control, and even recovering from front headlock, like at the high level, I think it's maybe the most important movement. It's not that complicated, but it's a lot of steps. In terms of discrete movements, it's almost like a berimbolo, where your body is having to perform several. It's not inverted, so it's a lot easier, like, for people to figure out. But find it. We've got material on it on the site. We've got material on it out there. Like you can learn it just about anywhere. If you don't know how to spin behind and somebody underhooks you, you're probably gonna have a bad answer. You're gonna go for something more desperate than you need. You're going to go for maybe a submission that isn't appropriate. You will have to develop submission-based answers for it, but until you have this simple movement, you're going to be doing more work than you need to.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great tips that Rob has provided here, and also some that I provided in the full mount video. But holding these dominant positions, especially on lower levels, like if you're a white belt or a blue belt and you're doing this to other white belts and blue belts, like it's pretty easy to do. And
Yes.
so you're going to have a lot of time to be able to experience different kinds of control, to play around with stuff, and you're going to get better at that. And then you're also going to feel like you can't control it worth shit against any of the higher belts.
Yeah.
And so that would be like the two most important things I want you guys to take away out of those two videos would be the windshield wiper movement, getting out a full mount, and then falling back to that leg drag position with side control, because that is something that...
And the spin behind.
And the spin behind, yes. But like for when we're looking at the idea of a tactical retreat, where you're
Yes.
about to lose that position,
Yeah.
to be able to hold it by making a calculated decision and to actually manage that range by falling back tactically and controlling that, that's huge. That was something that just absolutely changed everything for me. And you can practice that on the lower belts because you can kind of let them wiggle and give them that little glimmer of hope and then snatch it away from them. But then against the higher belts, you're going to have that stuff developed. The good thing is from that dominant position is that you have ample time, as long as you're not a greedy moron, to be able to tell that you're losing that. And you can kind of choose to lose that a bit quickly to fall back into it, or you can hold that control, make them wiggle slowly to it, and then work into it. It's something that's very easy to work on, technically. And physically, it's just more, I think, the mental aspect of it is people have to let go of that position that they've worked so hard for.
But doing that, not only will it improve your ability to control, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, this idea with side control that we often will have to choose between just controlling or giving somebody room to potentially escape and then try to submit them. It's so critical that you learn these mid points or quarter way points or late points of tactical retreat or of adjustment. Like, the spin behind is not really a retreat. The spin behind usually improves our position, either gets us to the other side of side control with better control, or it gets us onto the back if somebody's aggressively chasing the legs. And so when you are comfortable holding side control, not letting someone move at all, and then letting them move a little, and then letting them move a medium amount, and then letting them move a lot, and figuring out how you can still go back to the control or tactically retreat to something else, only then can you reliably start to threaten submissions against good people, because you're controlling them the whole way. You're not just giving them all they need to escape and hoping they're too stupid to know the most obvious answer. It's like if I let you put your knee in and I just try to heel hook you, it's not going to work on a lot of people. But if I know exactly how much control I've got on you and I try to heel hook you, or I try to hanging triangle you or omoplata you when you come up on an underhook, I can do all those things because I've had so much experience knowing exactly when I'm going to lose control and exactly when I still have ample control and can manipulate you. So that without these waypoints between like full on side control with the crossface and the underhook and somebody just re-guarding or coming up on an underhook, this is where the skill in the position lies, and this is where you'll be able to control and submit people